Thank you for tuning in to Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Scott Deluzio. He is an Army veteran, having served 6 years with the Army National Guard, including a deployment to Afghanistan in 2010. Scott's brother Stephen was also deployed to Afghanistan, also in 2010. Unfortunately, Stephen was killed in action on August 22nd, 2010. After returning home, Scott struggled with coping with the stresses of combat, the loss of his younger brother, and adjusting back to civilian life. Thank you so much for being here, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be able to come on and share my story with you and your audience.
And it is a story that really hasn't been expressed on the podcast. I know I was on your podcast, Drive On,
Mhm.
a while back, and I'm not sure when that episode will go live for sure. I don't remember anymore, but and at the time of this recording, it doesn't matter. But we have that in common where we both deployed. I was deployed in Iraq, but I have not had this type of loss represented on the podcast. So thank you for being open to sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, we have a lot of STURBs. No, rewind. I'll have to edit this out. We have a lot of acronyms, right? In the military, it's all acronyms. And one
Right.
acronym that we also have in grief recovery is our STURBs. And it means short term energy relieving behaviors. And you mentioned a STURB in your information that you shared with me. And yours, it sounds like, was alcohol. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. When I got back from Afghanistan, I was home with my family, and I couldn't sleep for anything. Sleep was just eluding me. It was night after night where I would just be laying in bed staring at the ceiling, not able to fall asleep. Um, and the pain of losing my brother was significant. And I found myself drinking more and more and more. It started off just normal, like casual drinking, having a glass of wine with dinner or something like that. But then it became more and more after dinner, going in later into the night, and I found that I was uh, helping myself to fall asleep by basically drinking until I passed out. So it wasn't really sleep; it was really just I was making myself pass out, which obviously has the issue of the next morning I was hungover. I wasn't the friendliest or nicest person to be around, and you know I I would I would kind of get through the day just by drinking more and more coffee throughout the day just to keep myself going, energy drinks, things like that. Um, but then that started affecting my sleep too. As I was drinking it later and later in the day, it just became this vicious cycle. And I would use like sleeping pills, trying to help myself get to sleep, and combining that with the alcohol, that doesn't isn't exactly the healthiest option either. And it was just one of those things where I was looking for that relief, that uh, basically numbing the pain, getting rid of that, uh, not addressing it, not facing it head on, and dealing with it in a healthy way. Uh, and that was causing a lot of problems. It caused problems with my physical health, my mental health, my relationships, my job. I was going into work basically hungover, on a regular basis, and it wasn't exactly what you want to do when you're working in a professional kind of corporate job. It's not what you really want to do. You're kind of looked at a little bit differently when you're walking in still kind of shaking off the cobwebs and everything. So um it was just really hard for me to uh, be able to deal with the stuff that I was going through. Um and and, and it was hard. It was hard for me to get through all of that.
How old were your kids at the time?
So I had a before I deployed, my first son was born. So he was 9 or 10 months old at the time, so young enough that he doesn't remember this part of
Mhm.
life. I now have two other kids who fortunately were not around during that time period either, and so they don't remember that obviously either. So um, but I also wasn't the best dad either. I would have uh, and this was like when I got home, he was about 9 or 10 months, but this obviously went on for a little while afterwards too. So, he was a toddler. He's getting into trouble like all little kids do, right? And I would just have a short temper with just about everything. And when he would do things that normal kids do, they spill their food off their high chair, or they uh, you know make a mess in the living room, or whatever it is that he was doing. uh, it I just would flip out, and I'd start screaming and yelling, and that was just not who I was. That's not the type of person who I was before I deployed. I I was a pretty easygoing type of person. I wasn't too high strung. I didn't get upset over little things like that. Um, sure, there's inconveniences, but you just deal with them as you go along in life, right? And but I was finding it harder and harder to deal with even these small little inconveniences. And so I found myself just getting angry and frustrated, upset at all these little tiny things. And it was just about everything that I was getting mad at, and anything that was even slightly inconvenient or off or whatever. I just would I'd be flipping out about it. Uh, and I realized that's not the kind of dad I wanted to be. It's not the type of person I wanted to be for my son, for my wife, for the people who are around me that I cared about, who cared about me. I didn't want to be that kind of person, because then you just end up pushing those people away. And so yeah, that was kind of a long answer to that question, how old they were, um, but yeah, that was kind of that situation that I was going through.
When did that change for you? And did you notice that how you were reacting to situations, then your children sort of that's how they responded too to
Yeah,
situations? Like, were there behavior things with the kids then being reflected back to you?
yeah, and that's exactly what it was. I started noticing my oldest son. I used to do this thing when I would get frustrated or angry, where I would grit my teeth, and I started noticing him doing that. Anytime he would be getting upset at small little things, things that weren't going his way. It's time for a nap, and he didn't want to go take a nap, and he'd grit his teeth and he'd get angry, and it was like looking in a mirror. It was an ugly mirror. I didn't want to look in that mirror. Um, I wanted to have a happy, healthy child, not one who was getting angry at these little things the way I was doing. Um, and really for me, the moment where the light bulb went off and I realized something is definitely wrong, is this time when my dog that we had at the time, she's since passed away, but um, back then she had gotten sick. I don't know if she ate something that didn't agree with her or whatever, and she was walking in our bedroom, and she was right at the edge of our bedroom and the master bathroom that we had, which had nice tile floor, and the bedroom, which had a nice brand new white carpet. And she started to throw up, and she's standing right at the edge between the bathroom and in the doorway and to the bathroom. And she throws up right on the white carpet. And flipped out. I started screaming and yelling and everything, as if the dog can understand me anyways, right? Like she didn't know what I was saying. She knew I was mad, probably just by the tone of my voice and how loud I was and everything like that. But I mean, she's sick. She's not feeling well. What good was all of that yelling and screaming going to do anyways? Um, I was just mad that she didn't take 2 seconds to go walk into the bathroom, where it'd have been so much easier to clean up on a tile floor versus the white carpet. Right now, I probably have to go rent a steam cleaner and get that out and everything. But again, in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty minor inconvenience to things. And like that's not the kind of person that I am. I love dogs. I'm not the type of person who's going to be, getting upset at a dog for doing something that, is natural. She's feeling sick. So that's just what dogs, people, that's what anyone is going to do. Um, quite frankly, I feel like more dogs than certain people at times too, right? So I was like, that who is this person? Who am I? What have I become? And my wife and I, after that time, we kind of sat down, and she said, I thought you might be able to handle some of the stuff on your own, the stuff that you're going through, but it seems like you're having some tough time with it, and it might be time to reach out and get some help. And so I did, and I kind of realized that at that moment too. I was like, this isn't me. This isn't who I want to be, and I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong and what I need to do to change. And so I reached out to the vet center, which is kind of affiliated through the VA. I'm not sure exactly how, but I know they are, and they offer counseling services, and they helped me to get my anger under control, so that I wasn't having these outbursts all the time. Um, wasn't perfect. It's a slow process. It's not like you go in, you sit down on a couch for one session, and then boom, magically everything's rainbows and unicorns, right? It's a process, and it takes time. Um, but you have to. What I realize is that you have to let the process work. You can't just go in expecting uh, that Amazon overnight delivery where you get the results instantaneously. It's something that you have to work at, and you have to be conscious about what you're doing, and how your things are affecting you in your life, and that's what kind of helped me to get away from being so frustrated and angry all the time.
There is a quote, and I'm going to ad lib because I don't know exactly how it goes, but something to the effect of I sat with my anger long enough until it told me its name, and its name was grief. And I
Yeah.
really relate to your story in that, in the anger, because I would have called myself a ragey mom. I would, you would call yourself a ragey dad at that point, right?
Right.
Just so much anger, which really is grief and sadness and all these feelings unexpressed and undealt, not dealt with. But I didn't connect the dots to a situation I experienced until your story. When my son was 3 years old, um, and I had three children in 4 years. So I had a 3 year old, I had an 18-month-old, and I had a, what was she, 6 months old?
Okay.
Something
Wow.
great. I mean, boom, boom, boom. Like I was like a walking zombie,
Yeah.
angry, ragey mom, right? But my son just would not listen. He wanted to take his bike out, and I couldn't watch him get my kids in. I pulled into the garage and I need to get the car seat and the 18-month-old, or, however old she was, I think 18 months at the time. They're 18 months apart, actually. The older two are 18 months apart, and then the girls are 2 years. But anyway, a baby in a car seat, then the younger one or the middle one, had to get them in the house. And he was like just going on and on about needing his bike and wanting to ride his bike. And I said, I can't be outside with you right now. And I can't let him just ride around outside all by himself. So
Right.
I did what I thought I could do in that moment, and I locked his bike in the van. Take the girls into the house. Next thing I know, my middle one is coming in, mommy, mommy, Xavier is is hitting the van with a bat. What? And I step out in the garage, and no crap, he is slugging my van with the bat. So angry that I locked his bike in there, that he couldn't have his bike. Broke our window. It ended up costing over $2,000 to get that replaced. But I didn't connect it until your story of how Our anger is just reflected back to us from our
Mhm.
kids. If there are behavioral issues with your children, how about you look at your own behavior?
Yeah,
Parents listening?
right.
And what grief do you have that is unexpressed? So, thank you for sharing all of that because I really feel like that is a very good message for this podcast today.
Yeah, and there's another example of this too, where and not from my own personal life, but just from some TV shows that I've seen, where there's a show that it used to be on. I don't know if it's still on or not, but it was with um, this dog trainer. His name's Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer, right? And I remember he would go into these households where the dog is out of control and they're acting all crazy and out of control, and observes how the owners are acting and interacting with the dogs, and they're just as out of control. And so he looks at them and he says, "I think I need to train you before I start working on your dogs, because you're the problem. You are the one who is basically making this dog so crazy." And once when he starts addressing those behavior issues, then the dog starts behaving a little bit differently. And maybe, yeah, there's still some work that needs to be done with the dog itself, but it's really reflecting from the owners, right? And so it's the same idea, I think, where our behaviors and our reactions get reflected uh, to those who are around us.
Back to us, right? It's like a
Yeah,
boomerang. The energy you bring to a room, you're going to get it back.
yeah, exactly.
So, well, let's rewind the clock before you were a ragey dad, um, to where it all started because you deployed with your brother.
So he was in the Vermont Army National Guard. I was in the Connecticut Army National Guard,
Okay.
and um, both of our units, there was some reorganization that took place before we deployed, and both of our units ended up in the same brigade. And so this deployment was a brigade-wide deployment. So we were both deployed just about the same time. Give or take a couple weeks, just with training and other cycles that we had to go through before getting there. I actually got to Afghanistan first. He got there maybe a week or two later. Um, and but we were stationed far enough apart that we never saw each other once when we were there. And as a matter of fact, the only communication really that we had between the two of us was kind of playing that telephone game. When I would call home to our parents, they would tell me what was going on with him, and vice versa with him. So when he would call home, he'd find out what was going on with me and everything. Um, so we really didn't talk at all. We may have sent an email here and there, but really not much. Um, and quite frankly, we were kind of focused on our jobs, so we didn't really have all that much time to take off to go give each other a phone call, or find out what's going on with each other. Um, so yeah, so we were deployed at the same time, but not together, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Um, I ask that because I think it's important that people understand listening to this that that's a scenario that played out often,
Hmm.
still does likely, where you have siblings or people who are married. Like my husband and I deployed together, not in the same place, but we knew what each other was doing, right?
Yeah,
You knew what he was doing, he knew what
yeah,
you were doing. And yeah, you don't have that same level of communication as you did calling home.
right,
And so it makes it harder, I think,
yeah.
because you know what you're doing and you can't communicate as openly and freely. And so, I mean, was that always in the back of your mind, like this worry, knowing what he was doing too?
You know what? It it wasn't really, and I think it was like a defensive mechanism that I put up this shield, telling myself, basically lying to myself, saying that nothing was going to happen to him, nothing bad was going to happen to him. He had previously deployed to Iraq. He was in Ramadi in 2006, which was a really rough time to be in that area. Um, and I said if he made it through that, he's going to be able to make it through this deployment, no problem. I wasn't even worried about him getting injured or and killed. That wasn't even a thought on my mind. I didn't even entertain that thought. We were both going to come home, as far as I was concerned. We were both going to go back to our lives. I was going to come back to my wife and my son, and he was engaged to be married about a year after we were scheduled to come back home. So he was going to come home. He was going to get married. He was going to start his family, start his life, and everything with his fiance. And I just figured that's what's going to happen, and I didn't give it too much more thought than that. I wasn't worried that he was going to get injured or killed or anything like that, because that's just not what happens. That happens to other people. That doesn't happen to you. That's what you read about in the news. That's not what you experience firsthand in real life. That's just stuff that happens to quote unquote other people. Um, but it's a real punch to the gut when you become those other people, and it truly was unexpected as far as I was concerned. I knew what he was doing. I knew it was a dangerous job. Just never occurred to me that it would be a job that could ultimately take his life.
So what was that? How did that play out? Like, how did you find out?
Yeah. Um, so he and I both happened to be on missions that day where we were out in patrolling in these remote villages. His was not that remote. They were able to drive from their base to this village, and then dismount and walk into the village. The village I was in, we actually had to fly in on helicopters the night before to this mountaintop just outside the village, and then we patrolled down into the village as soon as the sun came up. Reason why is because we were working alongside with the Afghan army, and they didn't have night vision capability, so they weren't able to walk on that uneven, rough terrain in the dark to go do the mission that we're planning on doing. So we had to wait for the first light, and so we went through the village, and we're doing our job, looking through everything. And at one point, kind of partway through the day, I got a call on the radio, and they said that there was a helicopter coming in, and I needed to take my squad out to go secure a landing zone for it. And so we did. We went over. We found a clearing, kind of at the far end of the village, and we we secured that area, formed a perimeter around it, threw some smoke in that area, and the helicopter came down and landed. Um, and when we were just told that there were some VIPs on the helicopter, we didn't know who, but it was an American general and a couple French soldiers. So we were operating in French controlled territory. They kind of had that area, but I think they're just there to kind of check up and see what kind of intelligence we found, and what kind of stuff was going on that day. Um, when I started, since I was the highest ranking guy next to the general, I went to go greet him and show him where everything was, and everything. Which, as a sergeant, that was kind of a little nerve wracking, going in and interacting with that general. But he was a nice enough guy, and we're chatting for a little bit, and he gets a call on the radio, and uh, it tells him, and I can hear the radio, just by the nature of the microphone that he had. It says that there were two American casualties. Now, anyone who's been in the military knows that we don't use names on the radio, call signs at best, but we never use names going over the radio. So there are no names spoken. So at that point, I was just like, oh, that sucks. That's terrible. I feel bad for those people, for their families. I feel bad for them, but there's nothing I can really do about that situation right now. Um, so we continued on. I passed off the general to my platoon sergeant, and then I continued on with our mission. Um, and about a little while later, I don't remember exactly how long later it was, but I got a call on the radio from my commanding officer. And again, for anyone who's familiar with the chain of command in the military, uh, to for a sergeant to get a call directly from the commanding officer, either you did something really good or really bad, and they usually work their way through the chain of command. And I couldn't think of anything particularly good I did that day. I did my job, but it wasn't nothing spectacular. I wasn't getting any medals for what I had done that day. Um, and so my first thought was, okay, what did I do wrong? What did I screw up? Did my guys lose some equipment? Whatever, and I'm flipping out trying to figure it out. Um, and I couldn't figure it out. So eventually I linked up with the commanding officer, and he told me to come over to the side, kind of away from everybody else, to take my helmet off and take a knee. And that was another red flag because they never tell you to take your helmet off when you're outside the wire. Like that's like a big no-no. You never do that. And so I was like, okay, what's going on here? Something's screwed up. And so what he told me was that my brother's unit was involved in an ambush and that my brother had gotten hit. And so now it's like the first time it's dawning on me that he's not invincible, that something could happen to him. And so of course I'm just thinking he got hit and maybe he's wounded and he's injured. So I start going into big brother mode thinking, uh, how do I handle the logistics to get to him? How do I get to him to be there for support, or if he needs blood or an organ or something like that, how do I get to him? Um, and I guess what I didn't understand was that he was killed in action. And so when the commanding officer finally told me that he was killed in action, I, like anyone else, I broke down. I was crying. I was a mess. Except for I was a mess with uh, with a rifle, and a fully loaded rifle, all the ammunition that I could possibly need. Um, so it was a little more of a volatile situation than maybe if I was to find out when I was still at home. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but they constantly had people with me, basically to make sure I didn't do something stupid to either myself or to somebody else. Um, and so there was always at least a couple soldiers around me, to just make sure that I was okay. Um, Within about 20 minutes or so of finding out that my brother was killed, our own unit started taking fire from the village that we had just come out of. And so at that point, I realized I had to I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there feeling sorry for myself. But that grief that I had, that I was experiencing in that moment, turned to straight anger. I was so angry at the people of Afghanistan for not being able to handle this fight on their own, to require people like my brother and the thousands of others who came there and gave their lives for these people. Why couldn't they fight their own fight? Why did we have to be there? Why did we have to lose good people like my brother? I was so angry, in fact, that I had actually this fleeting thought of me just running back down into this village and just killing everybody that I saw. And because I was just so angry at these people, not even just the enemy who were fighting at with us. I had this vision of, I just want to kill everybody. I was that angry. But I realized if I was to do something like that, first off, I wouldn't make it. Just one man running down into a firefight like that. This isn't a Rambo movie. I'm not gonna survive that. So I started thinking about my wife. I don't want her to become a widow. I don't want my son to grow up without a father. And God forbid my parents end up getting a second knock on the door that day, telling them that now both of their kids have been killed. I couldn't do that to them. So I realized um, that I needed to suck it up, put this anger aside, put this grief aside, and I needed to focus on my job. I had about 10 soldiers or so that I was responsible for that day, and if something happened to me, or if I wasn't doing my job, I didn't have my head on straight, something bad could happen to them. And then how do I explain that to their families? how do I tell them that, hey, your loved one is no longer here because I couldn't keep my stuff together. I couldn't uh, keep my head on straight throughout this whole ordeal. Um, how do I say that to them? And so I realized I now had another group of people that I needed to uh, get myself straightened out for. And so I did. I was still angry, but I went and made sure that my men were positioned where they needed to be. And I say men because we were infantry, and at the time there were no females in the infantry, so they were all men. Um, uh, and I made sure that they were positioned where they needed to be. I made sure that their fire on their targets was going in the right direction. Made sure that they were conserving ammunition. Made sure that they were doing all the things that they were supposed to be doing, and they did a phenomenal job. I was very proud of how well they were able to operate under fire during that time period. And some of them had already known about what had happened to my brother, so they were just as mad as I was. Well, maybe not quite as mad as I was, but they were pretty mad. I had one of my soldiers had the 203 grenade launcher, and he just wanted to launch all of them and just annihilate whatever was standing in his way because he was just so mad. I had to remind him to conserve some of his ammunition, um, because we didn't know what else was coming. And so, um, so that took place just that was about 20 minutes after finding out that my brother was killed, and it was just horrible for me. After that attack died down, and we came out on top. Fortunately, we didn't have uh, any American killed in action in that fight, but we managed to stop the attack. Um, I was uh, I was told that they were getting a helicopter to come back and take me out of that area to start me on my journey home. When the helicopter landed, I got on the helicopter and I was sitting directly across from that same general that I talked to earlier in the day, and he recognized me and he said, "What weren't you the soldier that I was talking to just a little while ago?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you remember that call that you got about the two soldiers who were killed?" And I said, "Well, one of them was my brother." And he and I both just couldn't believe the coincidence that I happened to be out of all the thousands of soldiers who were in Afghanistan, I happened to be the one who was standing next to him when he got that call. Thank God they didn't use names on the radio because I don't know how this whole situation would have played out differently, but it would not have ended very well. I don't think so. Um, that would have been a terrible way to find out. But yeah, that was my day, and then that started my journey home. So they flew me to Bagram Air Base. The next day, I was able to be a part of what's called the ramp ceremony, which is where they bring the bodies of the fallen soldiers onto the plane that takes them out of Afghanistan. And there were two soldiers. The other soldier, Tristan Southworth, he was killed in the recovery efforts, trying to recover my brother's body. Um, and so I was able to be a part of that, and actually felt very fortunate that I was able to be there for that. Most soldiers don't have anybody uh, who is like a blood relative that is that close to them, um, who is able to be a part of that. And so I felt fortunate that I was able to be there and thank all of the people who came through. There were high-ranking American soldiers, generals, colonels, things like that. There were foreign soldiers, Polish and German soldiers who came through, who were paying their respects to a soldier that they didn't even know, but they felt the need to come and pay their respects. And I was able uh, to be there and thank them, um, and really just show my appreciation that they were able to take that time out of their day to come and do that. So from there, I was actually able to get on that same flight with my brother. We flew to Kuwait, where he and I parted ways. Um, I continued on to Germany, Atlanta, and then back home from there. So all in all, it took me about 2 days from the time that I found out that my brother was killed to the time that I was standing back home in Connecticut when I found out from the time that I found out that my brother was killed. It took about 2 days, which is uh, breaking all sorts of records as far as deployment travel is concerned. Usually, you don't get home that quickly, but they bumped me to the head of the line for all these flights.
Wow. And so did you end up having to go back on
I did
deployment
not.
after?
Um,
Okay.
no, I originally was scheduled to go back. They gave me 2 weeks to come back home for the funeral and things like that. But at the funeral, with any kind of high profile uh, death, like a military death or things like that, um, there were a lot of politicians and things like that who attended the funeral, and one which happened to be the state governor. And for anyone who's not familiar with the National Guard, the National Guard falls under both the federal and state jurisdiction. So uh, the commander in chief is also the governor as well as the president of the United States. So uh, at the funeral, the governor of the state of Connecticut told my family and I that I was not going to be going back. She was going to issue an order that I would stay back, stay home, because she said no family should have to go through that a second time. Um, and so from there, I stayed home. I was home uh, for the most part since the day that I came back. The only time that I had to leave was to do the out processing. When you get back from a deployment, you have to go through various medical and mental health screenings and process all the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, that took me back to Indiana and Camp Atterbury, so I had to leave my family for a period of time. They scheduled me for about 3 days to be there, and uh, I was like, there's no way I'm going to stay here for 3 days. This is just too much for me. So I ran through everything. I lied through my teeth through all the mental health screenings, just to check the box and get it over with, because I wanted, more than anything, I wanted to be home with my family. And uh, the only thing that was standing in my way was a checkbox on a piece of paper from these counselors saying that I was good to go. I wasn't good to go. I was nowhere near good to go. But I was like, I don't care at this point. I just want to get home.
And I think that's the case with anyone whenever they come home off a
Right.
deployment. Let's just get this over with and check the boxes. And, there's no real transparency and honesty. And not
Right.
just because you want to get back home, but, it's gotten a lot better. But I think, your rank, your career, like all those things come into play when you're looking at those boxes.
Yeah.
And, um, was this earlier on in your deployment or did it happen later? Like, did you feel guilt about that?
Yeah. It was towards the end of the deployment. So I had gotten there in like early February, and we were scheduled to be there until October, sometime in that time frame. And he was killed at the end of August. So we only had about uh, a month and a half or so left, maybe 2 months left in this deployment. And so, yeah, did I feel guilt? Yeah, I felt guilty about a lot of things. I started questioning, why I joined the. So my brother had joined the Vermont Army National Guard, which I think I mentioned earlier, but he had joined before I did, and I felt guilty that I didn't join with him in Vermont. Um, I joined the Connecticut Army National Guard, and had I joined the same unit as he did, I may have been able to be there with him. I may have been able to uh, do something to help him, to prevent this from happening. And so I kept going through all those what if scenarios in my head. Like, what if I had joined the Vermont National Guard? What if I had uh, talked him out of reenlisting when he did, which would have made him ineligible to deploy, because his enlistment was going to be up at some point during that deployment, and so he wouldn't have deployed. Um, what if I had done any number of other things? You know, and so I felt guilty for all of those things, that I didn't try harder, that I didn't try to talk him out of reenlisting, that I didn't try to uh, join the Vermont National Guard, that I didn't do any of these things, and all of that was starting to eat away at me too. It just made me feel like I was, uh, just a terrible brother. You know, you're as a big brother, like that's your job. Like your job is there to protect your younger siblings. And here I was, and I screwed that up, and I couldn't be there for him when he needed me the most. And um, and so I felt terrible about all of that, and it just ate me up inside.
So you said you reached out to the vet center and things started to turn around. When did you
Yeah.
when did you start to feel like you were really reconciling your grief and what you had been through and experienced with the loss of your brother and how did that transform your life?
Yeah. So it took a while. Like I said earlier, it's not a immediate overnight transition that takes place. At least it wasn't for me. I don't know. Some other people may have different experiences. Maybe they have that light bulb moment earlier on in the process, and things just start getting better. But for me, I was going to the vet center for almost 2 years, um, and at the time that I stopped going, the counselor that I was seeing, he was being transferred to another location, and I my family and I, we were planning on moving to Arizona where we live now, and it just seemed like a good time to kind of cut off the treatment. I said, I feel like I'm in a better place right now. I feel like I'm not having these angry outbursts all the time. Maybe I'm not perfect. Maybe I still have them occasionally, but I'm getting better at this, and I think I can handle it from here. And I wasn't drinking nearly as much as I had been before. And the goal was never to quit drinking altogether, for me, anyways, because I still enjoy a beer every once in a while, with uh, family or friends or whatever. It's not, but it's not like a I need this every night kind of thing, and that's what I was trying to get away from. I didn't need to uh, drink to make myself pass out and go to sleep. That's what I wanted to get away from. So it got me to the point where I was able to kind of manage my life a little bit easier, and I knew I still had some work to do, but I felt like I had the tools to do it and handle these things on my own. And so we moved out here to Arizona, stopped going to treatment for a while, and uh, a few years after being here, I started noticing that I was slipping into some of these old habits and patterns uh, that I had successfully gotten away from for a little while, but they were creeping back. I was starting to have a short fuse again, where I just get mad and angry at the littlest things. Um, and it wasn't until actually uh, late last year where I really realized why I was getting so angry at the little things. When you're in the military, and you know this probably just as well, when someone tells you to do something, they give you an order. It's not one of those things that's up for debate. Like, oh well, maybe if we do it this way and change it, it's no, this is what needs to happen, and that it needs to happen now, and just do it. um yeah, there's sometimes when there that might be appropriate, but in the heat of the moment, uh you kind of just have to follow those orders and do what is asked of you. And if it's not done as it's intended to be done, then that's when lives are at stake, when people start getting injured and killed. And I felt like I was carrying that same level of intensity just
Mm.
into my everyday daily life. Um, And it's like, that's no way, that's no way to live life, right? Like constantly acting as if everything is a life and death situation. When my son spills a glass of milk on the floor, that's not a life and death situation. When my dog throws up on the carpet, that's not a life and death situation. I don't need to have that level of intensity with those kind of situations. Yeah, I can be uh, frustrated that something like that happened, um, but I don't need to be, turning into Sergeant Scott mode, and start, yelling with the knife hands and everything, and going absolutely crazy about these situations. Um, but that's what I was doing, and I found myself falling back into those old patterns. I was having more and more trouble sleeping, so I found myself drinking more and more, and getting it back into those old habits. Um, and I realized at that point that our mental health is, it's not like some things with your physical health. Like if you were to break your arm, you go to the doctor, you get the cast put on, it's healed, you take the cast off, and it's good. You don't really need a follow up unless you break your arm or you re-injure it somehow, right? Um, so you're kind of just good after that, right? But your mental health is a little more fluid. It comes in waves. Certain things can set you off. Uh, Sights, smells, times of day, or even times of year can set you off. Anniversaries of things like a loved one's death or their birthdays, or certain holidays that you enjoyed celebrating together, or things like that. Those kind of things can set you off. And so what I realize is that it's worthwhile to, uh, just like with your physical health, to go get a checkup every once in a while. Go and just have a chat with someone, and just make sure that everything's still uh, ticking the way it's supposed to be ticking. You go to the doctor for an annual physical to make sure that your cholesterol is in check, to make sure that your um, you're maybe do a cancer screening, on an annual basis, to make sure that something didn't pop up in the last year, right? Um, there's nothing wrong with going and continuing to get mental health treatment uh, on a periodic basis, whether that's annually or more or less frequently, whatever makes sense for you. Um, but there's nothing wrong with that. If there's something that could be popping up for you, go talk to somebody. And lately, I've been in several different treatment options for PTSD. And currently, I'm doing prolonged exposure therapy, where you basically are talking about these trauma memories that replay in your head over and over again, and you talk about it. And the idea is sort of like if you were to watch a scary movie. The first time you watch it, it's pretty scary. But if you were to sit down and force yourself to watch that movie 25, 30 times, by that point, you kind of know when the guy's going to jump out of the closet, and you know what's coming, and it's not so scary anymore. And so that's kind of the idea with this as well, is that you kind of relive some of those memories over and over again, to the point where they're not as traumatic to you. They're still, um, it's not taking away the impact that they may have had on your life, but it's reducing your response to it. You're not jumping out of the seat in that scary moment in the movie anymore. You're not waking up in the middle of the night, uh, having nightmares about these things anymore, and that's kind of the goal. And so, um, that's what I've been doing, and this is 12 years after the fact, and it's okay. It can be one of those things that goes on for years, but you just manage the situation um, differently. And it's been 12 years for me, but I did have a significant time period in between where I took a break, so it wasn't like I was continuously working on this for 12 years. Um, so not to discourage anyone who might be looking for that type of thing. It's not like this is a normal results where yeah, this is going to take me decades to get through. Um, it may not. I don't know, but um, for me, it's one of those things where I just realized it's okay to ask for help even all these years later, and the help that I'm getting is helping in various areas, and so it's just being open to getting that treatment.
I commend you for reaching out a second time. We often think that, you had that gap and you think you go through life and you think, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm
Yeah,
fine, I
right.
got this, right? Did you have another loss that kind of catapulted you back in time to that heartbreak? Because you mentioned, this is the perfect part to say this too, because you said when you have a broken bone, you go to the doctor, and we say in grief recovery, you have a broken bone, you go to the doctor. Why do we not go to the doctor when we have a broken heart?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's more than just our mental health. It's a broken heart.
Mhm.
Did you have a broken heart again during that you found yourself realizing, "Uh-oh, I'm falling back into these patterns."
You know, I didn't have a loss to the same extent that that losing my brother was. I didn't have a loved one pass away like that. But what I did have, and this was about 4 years ago now, um, and this was kind of in the middle of the process. So I don't know if this was um, exactly what was the catalyst for this change for me or whatever, but it may have helped push me over the edge a little bit. But my wife had pretty significant medical issues where she started having some seizures, and she had never had seizures before in her life, and she ended up in a coma, and the doctors and the nurses weren't sure what we were going to get when she came out of this coma. They weren't sure um, if she was going to be uh, responsive. They didn't know what was going to happen when she eventually came out of the coma, um, and so yeah, that was a scary situation for me because here I am with three kids. Um, I've always relied on her. We've always relied on each other, I should say, to uh, to build this family, and now I'm questioning whether or not she's going to be there anymore, uh, and that was really scary for me. Um, and I'm not saying that necessarily caused me to start drinking and start falling down this path, because I think there were some other uh, warning signs early on that I was starting to slip back into that pattern, um, but that's when I realized that I needed to get some help for myself too. I needed to get back into it and start seeking out some sort of treatment. And I tried several different things, but it really was once when we found out that she was going to be okay. I realized I needed to get back um, uh, and start taking this seriously, and not just say, oh, I'll be okay, I'll just deal with it. I needed to do more, be more proactive with my mental health.
I think that a situation like that too is such a reminder for us that we are not in control.
Right.
And so when you're in the military and you're wearing the uniform and you're the one that has to be in control and everything is precise and accurate and you're giving orders and taking orders and everything is, you know how it
Hmm.
is.
Right.
It's a controlled, we do our best to have it be a controlled environment and respond like that when it's not, right?
Right.
And so when there's a situation like that, like with your wife, I can see it could pull you right back into that when you lost your brother and this feeling of no sense of control out of,
Right.
But I also know you had lost a dog, didn't you?
Yeah, well, this was later on. So this was in the summer of 2020 that that my dog passed away. Um, and that was a pretty significant loss too, because she had been with our family for let's see, we got her probably 2 months or so after my wife and I got married. So pretty much our entire marriage, she was there throughout this whole grieving process. She was the dog that I was yelling at for throwing up on the carpet. Um, and the cool thing about dogs is, as much of a jerk as I was to her uh, during that time period, she still, till the day that she died, she still was wagging her tail and happy to see me. And um, we actually called her my coworker, because I work from home. And whenever I would go into the office, she'd be right at my heels. She'd always come into the office with me. And as she got older, she was an English bulldog, so very low energy. She would just come into the office and sleep at my feet all day, and she was happy as can be able to do that. Like, that was just uh, was so awesome for her. So much so that on the weekends when I wouldn't go into work, she would stand by the door and just start barking, because she's like, no, this is where we need to be right now.
Yeah.
I need to be here. And so um, you know, uh, so the loss of that dog was significant. She had been there for the entirety of my children's lives up until that point. They never knew what it was like to live without a dog. Um, uh, my wife and I actually found, because the dog used to sleep in our bedroom. Um, uh, she had a little bed next to ours. My wife and I actually found it difficult to sleep at night because we didn't have her snoring in the room with us, which sounds weird. Like, you might think like, oh my god, that's so annoying, but it actually became like a white noise kind of thing, where we almost came to expect it to be there. Um, and so, yeah, it had some impact as well on us. And we're coming up on 2 years as of the time of this recording. By the time this recording airs, it's going to be a little bit after that. But um, you know, it even just last night, I was talking with my daughter, and she was saying how she still misses the dog. And so it's had an impact on our family. And um, you know, yeah, you can say it's just a dog, but the people who live with the dog, like, that's a part of your family, and you don't want anything bad to happen to them.
And you
And
don't want to break a dog owner's heart by saying it's just a dog. Don't do
right,
that, people.
right,
You're just
right,
breaking their heart all over again.
exactly, yeah.
But
So
I
there
bring
was
that up. Yeah, I bring that up because it's grief is cumulative and it's cumulatively negative. So all of those things that you experience, they just stack up over
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah. And what really got me, and I knew that uh, she didn't have much time left, with us, just because uh, English bulldogs, they tend to live for about 8 to 10 years, and she was pushing 12. I kind of knew time was limited for her. She was basically on borrowed time as far as I was concerned, because that's uh, that uh, they just don't live that long. And um, what killed me, though, was seeing my kids' reaction when they found out that she had died. Um, eh, the heartbreak in them was like just stabbing me too, because like, I don't want my kids to be sad and upset over things like that. But at the same time, I was glad that they knew the love
Mhm.
that they had, right? I'm glad that they were able to experience that, because without the highs, you can't have the lows, or maybe the other way around, right? If you don't have those lows, you don't appreciate the highs as
Mhm.
much, right? Um, and so, in a way, I was sort of glad, but at the same time, it was like stabbing me with a knife. It was hard to see them experience that.
So how do you, because I know like in those earlier years and the angry years and experiencing the grief years, you felt very angry and things, and guilt, and all of those things that these feelings that we punish ourselves with, and we don't give ourselves compassion or grace. What does that look like for you today now that you're in, you're getting help again, and things are, you're feeling more, maybe more like yourself? Um, how has that changed for you? How you
I
give
think
yourself compassion and things like that?
I think what you said earlier about how grief is cumulative, I think that's true for a lot of the experiences that we have in life. So, uh, as you experience things, you learn and grow from them. All the way back from when you were a kid, and you touched something that was really hot for the first time. You learn really quickly not to do that again, right?
Mhm.
And but that's like one experience that you carried on throughout your entire life. Everything that you experience is something that you're going to carry on throughout your life, and grief is included. The loss of a loved one, a pet, a family member, whoever it is, there that is something that's going to carry with you, and how you deal with those things will also carry with you. Um, and I think I had a really hard time for the longest time uh, letting myself um, just just accept the fact that there are certain things that are out of my control. That um, that no matter what I did or didn't do, um, it was his time. It was his time. Uh, it it would have happened whether I was standing right next to him or not. Um, and so I just had to be okay with that. And um, it took me a while to start to accept that there are certain things just out of my control. It took me a while to learn how to grieve. When I had lost loved ones before, grandparents and things like that earlier on, but never never someone as close to me as my brother was. And I I didn't really know how to grieve that kind of loss. Um, when we got into that firefight right after I found out that he was killed, I felt like I put the grief aside. I stopped being able to grieve, and I picked up the anger, and that's all I really knew was just how to be angry. In the military, it's it's almost like applauded when you're going around being angry at
Mm.
things all the time. It's like, okay, well, this person's serious and they're intense and they're you know they're they're really taking their job seriously. Okay, yeah, I get that, but when you're coming home and you're screaming at your 1-year old and you're yelling at your dog and you're just being an absolute jerk, that's not the same thing. And that's, I think I replaced my grief with anger. And so for the longest time, I don't think I was actually even grieving. I think I was just actively being angry, trying to do something, trying to be in control of a situation I had no control over. Um, and so it took me a while, but I eventually figured out how to accept the things that I had no control over, to accept the fact that he was gone, that no amount of yelling and screaming and losing my temper was going to bring him back. Um, but what I could do is remember the good times with him. Remember the things that we used to do, the trouble we used to get into as kids. Remember the fun that we would have, even as adults. We would go to hockey games together, and we'd have fun. I there's various stories I probably could tell about all that kind of stuff too. But um, I started thinking about those things, um, and then I started thinking about, would he be okay with how I'm reacting to this. Like if, whatever people believe, if they believe in heaven and hell and all that kind of stuff. But, just imagine for a minute, regardless of what you believe, that there's some portal to wherever they are, and they're able to look down at us and see how we're behaving. Knowing what you know about that person, would they be proud of what you're doing with your life and how you're acting? Would they be upset? Would they be sad for you? Would And I thought, why not try to, whether there's that portal that I'm talking about or not, why not try to live life in a way that would make him proud? Um, and and that's what I've done. I think, anyways, with my podcast. You mentioned it earlier, the Drive On podcast, um, where I'm trying to help out other veterans who are struggling with various issues, whether it's PTSD or addiction or uh, job transition, things like that. I want to help people, and so that they're not struggling by themselves. Um, and I've also written my book that talks about this whole experience, Surviving Son, um, which my goal for that is to hopefully have the other people who uh, maybe the service members who were dealing with stuff similar to what I was dealing with, uh, to make sure that they realize that there are healthier ways to deal with the grief and the losses that they may experience. Maybe that those people didn't lose a blood relative the way I did, but maybe they lost a close friend in combat or in a training accident or something like that. There's healthier ways to deal with it than what I did. But I also want uh, everyone else who reads it to realize that uh, there is a real person behind the name that you hear on the news. Anytime that you hear about these combat deaths, last year had the uh, 13 troops that were killed in Afghanistan during the end of that withdrawal period. Each one of those people had a family and had uh, people who cared about them, and they had a life before that. They had hobbies and interests and things that they were known for, and uh, you know we don't know every single one of them. We don't know, maybe even don't even know their names, but why not? They were people who went out and laid their lives down. We should take some time to get to know who these people were. Not that that would ever replace their being here, but it helps if their memory lives on. And so that's what I wanted to do in my book, is talk about my brother and his upbringing and how we were as kids and everything. So by the time you get to the point where he's killed, you sort of feel like you knew him before he was killed, and it almost gives you that sense of um, like you almost lost someone that you knew too. Not necessarily to that same extent um, that I would have grieved him or anything, but it just gives you a little perspective, little insight into um, those names that you hear on the news.
It humanizes the story.
Yeah, it does.
And so, what is one of your most favorite memories with Stephen or of Stephen, or a memory that like would embody who he was?
So he was okay. He was, first off, he was kind of a goofball. He would always do things to make people laugh. No matter what, no matter what the situation was. If you were having a bad day, you came home from work or school or whatever, and you're having a bad day, he'd figure out a way to get you to laugh. Um, it, if you were telling a story, talking about something that was boring to him, if he was standing there, he would literally collapse on the ground and pretend like he was sleeping. You'd because that was his way of saying, "Hey, this is boring. I don't want to talk about this anymore." And so we'd all start laughing because it was just funny, right? Um, But there's one time, and I talk about this in the book because I think it.
I'm gonna steal that.
Well, and you know what? We've done that too. Like after he passed away, sometimes we'll be sitting around. I'll be sitting with my parents and talking, and they'll be saying something. And I'm like, this is so boring and stupid, and I'll just like put my head down and like, you know.
I'm gonna
Um,
do that to someone, see what the reaction is. That's
but
great.
so this other story that I talked about in my book, I think really shows how much life he had in him and how lively of a person he was. So we were up in Boston watching a Boston Bruins hockey game, and they were playing the Montreal Canadiens. And it's a big rivalry between Montreal and Boston and everything. And so the Bruins had won that game. And so there was this whole big like USA kind of vibe in the arena, right? Everyone's like, all this patriotic kind of thing, like, oh, Canada, yeah, okay, whatever, Canada, that kind of stuff. Um, and so he and I had been a few beers deep at that point, really enjoying the game. And so if you've ever walked out of a pro sports arena, you know that the sea of people, you're waddling like penguins trying to get out of the place, right? And there's this whole, as far as your eye can see, almost there's people, right? Well, we're standing there, and with this whole big patriotic vibe going, my brother starts yelling, USA, USA. And he gets the entire arena, all of these people to start chanting that too. And it's amazing. It's like deafening how loud it was because we're in this small like hallway corridor kind of thing, and it continues all the way into the stairwell, walking out of the place, going down out into the street, and it's just funny, right? So he and I had nothing but beer up until that point, and so we were pretty hungry, and we found a burger place across the street, and we went in to go get some food. And so we sit down, and the waiter comes by and takes our order, and he asked my brother, Is Canadian bacon okay on your burger?" And my brother looks at him like he was about to rip his face off, and he goes, "Hell no, I want American bacon on this burger." And then he cracks a smile, and we realize that he's just joking, right? And then the waiter goes, "Would you like French fries with that?" And he has that same disgusted look on his face. He goes, "Hell no, I want American fries." And the guy's like, "I don't even know what to do with that, but you're gonna get fries, whatever." But that's just the kind of guy he was, where he could get an entire arena to start chanting USA, USA. And then he can flip to just joking around with a waiter at the restaurant. And it was just, to me, it was a very memorable time. If he was still here today, I don't even know if he would remember that he had done any of that. But to me, it was just like, that's him. That's his personality. And I think that gives a good example of who he was.
Wit and humor. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I'll probably share that story later with my husband. It's great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
thank you so much for sharing everything that you have. I have no doubts that this is going to be helpful for many people. I wanted to like dig into more of the alcohol and, because that's a stirb. I talked about that earlier, and
Yeah.
anger is also a stirb, and I could have gone there too in the conversation, but I feel very whole and complete with what we've talked about. And I want to give you an opportunity to share anything else if you have anything else to share.
Yeah, a couple things. For people who are going through grief like this, or any kind of grief, um, I, some people say it gets better with time. I don't know that that's true. I think it gets different. You kind of learn to live with that difference in your life. You learn to live with that loved one not in your life anymore. You start to learn how to not rely on that person being there, and you adjust. So life gets different. Um, and the sooner you get okay with the fact that life gets different, I think the easier time you'll have with the whole process. Not I'm not trying to say that it ever gets easy. Um, it just gets different, and when you have that difference and you're okay with that difference, it does get easier, because you're not you're not swimming upstream. You're not fighting against the current or whatever. You're you're kind of accepting it and moving on and learning uh, how to live life without whatever that thing is in your life that you're grieving. So, um, anything from loss of a loved one, a pet, a job loss, relationship that ends. All of those are different types of grief, but the sooner you learn to accept the fact that things are just going to be different, I think that the sooner you can get on with life and have a happier, more fulfilling life. Um, I if I can, I know we mentioned my podcast earlier, the Drive On podcast for any veterans or loved ones of veterans who might be struggling. Uh, the Drive On podcast, you can find it at driveonpodcast.com. And then my book, Surviving Son, you can get that on Amazon. Just search for Surviving Son, and it should pop up there. It's also at survivingsonbook.com, and you can find it there. Um, but ultimately, the goal for me is to help people find hope where they might feel that all hope is lost. So, if there's anything um, that I've said or have worked on that might help people, that's really the goal for me, is just to get that information out there and help as many people as possible.
Thank you so much. And I'll put the links to those mentions in the show notes. Just to piggyback what you had shared, um, it's about time. It's making the choice to take action in that time.
Right.
That really is the catalyst for change. It's making a choice to make a change and taking action towards that change that you want to see in your life and in your
Yeah,
grief. So,
absolutely.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um, yes. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.